I need you to stop for a second. Just stop. Because something happened while everyone was focused on ceasefires and press conferences and Trump posting on Truth Social. Something that nobody in mainstream media is talking about with the urgency it deserves. Satellites were watching Iran, and what they found, I genuinely don't think people understand what this means yet. So let me tell you. During the ceasefire, right now, today, Iran has bulldozers running, excavators, dump trucks, all of them working around the clock at underground military bases, pulling buried missile launchers back out of tunnels that American and Israeli bombs sealed shut. Let that sink in for a moment. America spent 45 days and hundreds of billions of dollars bombing those tunnels specifically to trap Iran's missiles underground. And Iran, the moment a ceasefire was agreed, brought in the diggers. If you are not fascinated about that, or at minimum deeply intrigued by it, then I haven't explained it properly yet. So let me try again. This is the Hormuz Files, and I'm 11 Alpha. Okay. So here are the facts. Commercial satellite imagery, captured April 10th, shows what is happening at an underground ballistic missile base near a city called Khomeini in central Iran. And look, I know that sounds dry when I say it like that. Underground base, satellite imagery, central Iran. But stay with me, because this is genuinely extraordinary. The images show engineering teams, heavy construction equipment, front-end loaders scooping rubble out of tunnel entrances, dump trucks carting it away. These are the same tunnel entrances that American and Israeli aircraft spent a month bombing. The whole point, the entire strategic logic of those strikes, was to seal the tunnels, to trap the missile launchers inside, so they couldn't drive out, couldn't fire, couldn't reload. US intelligence told CNN that roughly half of Iran's missile launchers survived the bombing campaign. Half. And a lot of those survivors are the ones that got buried underground when the tunnel entrances collapsed. So now, during the ceasefire that America pushed for, Iran is getting them back. A researcher at the James Martin Center for Non-Proliferation Studies explained it in a sentence that I keep coming back to. He said, "This is what Iran always planned. You absorb the first attack, you dig yourself out, and then you launch again. Absorb, dig out, launch again. That is the doctrine. That is 20 years of preparation playing out in real time on satellite footage that anyone can look at." Scott Ritter told us on day 3 they were bombing empty buildings. Colonel MacGregor said the air campaign couldn't achieve its objectives. Professor Jiang said Iran had been preparing for this for 2 decades. I remember reading all of that and thinking, these people know something that Washington doesn't. And honestly, looking at those satellite images, I think that every single day. Now, I want to bring someone new into the Hormuz Files, and I'll be straight with you. I should have introduced this man earlier. His name is John Mearsheimer, Professor of Political Science at the University of Chicago. And if you follow international relations at all, you know this name. If you don't, you are about to. Mearsheimer has spent over 40 years studying one question. How do great powers actually behave in the real world? Not how they say they behave, not the speeches and the press releases and the values they claim to represent. How they actually behave when survival and dominance are on the line. He developed something called offensive realism, which is basically the unsentimental argument that in a world of competing powers, what drives decisions is not morality or ideology or what looks good. It's power and survival, and the cold calculation of what each actor needs to stay on top. He co-wrote a book called The Israel Lobby and US Foreign Policy that caused an absolute earthquake in Washington when it came out. He's been right about what NATO expansion would lead to in Ukraine. He was right about Libya. He's been right about more things than most people who get paid to be right about things. And a few days ago, he published an essay. The title alone is worth sitting with. Attacking Iran was irrational, not unwise, not premature, not risky, irrational. That is an academic using a precise technical term, and his argument is devastating. He says Trump launched this war based on a theory of victory that had no credible foundation. The assumption was that air power alone could trigger regime change, that you bomb enough things and the government collapses, and a new one emerges that surrenders to your demands. And Mearsheimer says, look at the historical record. Look at the academic literature on air power. That has essentially never worked. Not in the way that was assumed here. So the theory of victory was wrong from the start. And if the theory of victory is wrong, the whole operation is irrational. From the University of Chicago, from a man who has no political axe to grind, irrational. But here is what Mearsheimer says that I think is even more important than the irrational argument. He says, America is now in a quagmire. And I know that word gets thrown around, but Mearsheimer uses it very deliberately. Vietnam was a quagmire. Afghanistan was a quagmire. Iraq was a quagmire. And the pattern is always the same. You go in fast. You have the firepower. You destroy things. You declare some form of victory. And then you discover that destroying things from 30,000 feet is completely different from achieving the political outcome you actually wanted. And the exit becomes complicated. Mearsheimer is saying that is where America is right now in Iran. No clear exit strategy. No achievable version of what winning actually looks like. And Iran gaining leverage, not losing it, as the war goes on. He also raises something about Netanyahu that I think is one of the most genuinely uncomfortable arguments I have heard throughout this entire conflict. He suggests, and look, he's careful about how he says it, but he suggests that Netanyahu may have understood from the beginning that a quick, decisive victory wasn't coming. That what he was actually doing, consciously or not, was drawing America into a prolonged war. Because a prolonged war, even one America struggles in, serves certain Israeli strategic interests. It keeps Iran tied down. It keeps American resources and attention focused on the region. It weakens Iran over time, regardless of whether America technically wins or loses. I am not going to tell you what to make of that. Honestly, I find it deeply uncomfortable to even say out loud. But Mearsheimer said it, and Mearsheimer has earned the right to say uncomfortable things. Let's talk about the Lebanon ceasefire, because the way it got reported, you would think this was some brilliant diplomatic breakthrough. Trump announces a 10-day truce between Israel and Lebanon, cameras rolling, everyone applauding. And the reality of what actually happened is, let me put it carefully, quite different from that picture. Iran had been saying for weeks that it would not come back to the negotiating table unless Israel stopped bombing Lebanon. That was the condition. Iran set it, and Washington knew it. So the sudden urgency to get a Lebanon ceasefire, that urgency wasn't about Lebanese civilians. It was about getting Iran back to the table before April 22nd. Iran told America what it needed to do, and America scrambled to deliver it, and then presented it as a win. And here is the part that, honestly, is almost darkly funny if the stakes weren't so high. Netanyahu's own security cabinet found out about the Lebanon ceasefire from the media. They had literally just finished a meeting the night before where they made no decision on a ceasefire. And then Trump posted about it on Truth Social. And Netanyahu's people read it on their phones like everyone else. That is the level of coordination between Washington and Jerusalem right now. 5 days before a ceasefire expires, with a naval blockade running, with Iran digging missiles out of mountains, and America's most important ally in the region is learning about its own ceasefires from social media. I don't say this to be dramatic. I say it because it matters. Because this kind of chaos, at this level of stakes, is exactly the kind of environment where accidents happen. Here is where I stand after everything we have covered today. Iran is not losing this war. I know that's not what you hear on the news. I know the official line is that the bombing was a success and the ceasefire is progress and diplomacy is working. But look at the evidence. Iran's government is intact. Its population is unified. Its missile launchers, half of which survived 6 weeks of the most intense bombing since World War II, are being dug back out of the ground during the ceasefire. And Professor Mearsheimer, who has no political agenda and every intellectual credential you could ask for, just called the entire operation irrational on his public Substack. The trap Jiang described in 2024, the empty buildings Ritter warned about on day 3, the economic catastrophe MacGregor predicted for months, the leverage Galloway said Iran would never give up, the control Marandi said America couldn't take away, the intelligence failures McGovern identified from the very beginning, and now Mearsheimer, the dean of offensive realism, calling the whole thing irrational. Every voice, every perspective, every framework pointing in the same direction. And Iran, quietly, methodically, with bulldozers running through the night, is making sure it stays pointed that way. 5 days until April 22nd. Subscribe if you haven't. Share this with someone still watching mainstream media. Tell them the war is going well. And tell me in the comments, after everything today, do you think Iran is executing a strategy while America is improvising? I genuinely want to know what you think. I'll see you in the next file.